Hey everyone, I'm back again with another video, and in this one it's going to be another Witmer's critiques, as I'm going to be testing out my new Nikon Z30. I got this camera a couple months ago, been testing it out here a few times. Even if you check out the MikeWitmer Podcast YouTube page, some of the older videos I've used this camera on, the last few highlights from the podcast and the tour of this space here, I also did using this camera. So just kind of want to give an overall kind of review on this camera and see if it's worthwhile. So if you're interested to see if the Nikon Z30 is worth it, keep watching. Again, if you aren't familiar with my page or whatever, I'm not the most tech savvy kind of person or whatever. I've done a few tech reviews in the past. The most recent one being that Tiki Sky mic that I did last year, and then I also did one on an older GoPro that I had that I kind of tested out here and there. But if you're familiar with those, I don't really go too technical in terms of everything that goes with these kind of products and everything. But more than likely than not, this is going to be similar to that Tiki Sky review that I did, where it's going to be me in different kind of settings. First in this indoor kind of setting, and then I'm going to take it outside, see how it does there. I'm going to really be testing out 3 different settings that I care about most in terms of this camera and just in general. One of them being the audio, which for the most part, since I've been using it, has been good, but I want to test it out in different settings. So I want to test out how the zoom kind of works with this lens I have on top of it, and the focusing, how long it kind of takes to focus on everything. Again, there's the tour I kind of gave you a little glimpse of what this camera kind of is, but this one I'm going to go a little bit deeper on. These are the 3 main things I feel are most important to me with this camera, and I'll kind of go a little bit deeper on all those as this video goes on. But yeah, without further ado, let's kind of get in on this review. So like I mentioned in the last clip, I'm going to start it off in the indoor setting. It just makes sense to kind of show off in my little workspace, but I'm not going to go too heavy on it. Just because I've used this space already a few times doing these past like 2 or 3 solo podcasts, and it just feels like it's already kind of at its best kind of thing. And I feel like what I really want to do in terms of these 3 settings that I'm most kind of interested in, or everything, I just kind of want to see how it is if I'm a little further back, see how it kind of does picking me out from far away, and obviously kind of do seeing how it does focusing and the zoom and everything. So what I'm going to do next is kind of throw it on this tripod here, the same tripod I use for when I do the solo podcast. The only difference being I'm not going to be at my normal podcasting table. I'm going to be back at my desk, as I just showed in the last little clip as I started talking about this. I'm actually going to be kind of sitting back there, testing out, seeing how long it kind of takes to kind of focus on one area and all that kind of stuff. So now that it's on the tripod, I just want to do one quick thing here, and that's just with the zoom. I just kind of want to zoom in. Back desk. There we go. Now that it's on the actual camera, on the desk itself, I'm going to go back there next and just see how it does at picking my voice out from that far back. So now on the back here, the big thing, kind of like when I did those Tiki Sky reviews back when I was going farther back to see how well that mic was picking me up. Without an external mic, I'm curious how this camera is doing in terms of picking my voice out from this being that far back. If I go a little softer in my voice, is it still going to pick me up as loud as it does when I'm on my actual podcasting site, where I'm a little closer to the camera? Good thing so far that I've seen with this camera compared to the past cameras that I've had used in the past, I've always had to use some kind of external mic. And if you aren't already familiar with the many videos I've done on this channel talking about it or podcast wise, I've mentioned it a few times. The camera I used during college, I showed it in that tour video I did. It's a little red camera. I'll show it a little bit later. That one, the audio was very mumbled and muffled. You just could very much hear very little from that camera. And the last camera I was using, for the most part, for most of these solo podcasts before I got this one, that one I absolutely needed a external mic for. And in that Tiki Sky video, I showcased how different it was in terms of when that mic was on versus when that mic was off. And this is why I want to test it out here, because again, I have this tendency still to kind of mumble here and there. I've definitely gotten better at that, but it's still kind of an important thing to me to know if how this camera kind of does at picking my voice out from this far away. Which is why we're doing this. It's just why, again, it's a kind of one of the things I was interested in when I got this camera. And here's the camera I was talking about before. This camera here I've been using since college, essentially, or I was using during college. And again, kind of showing a little bit of how easy it is just kind of focus on things. But this was the first kind of real camera that I was using, and again, the fuzziness of the audio on this camera was always just such an issue, which is why I just never really used it outside of just college and taking courses and like video and stuff like that. Again, I'm still getting used to this camera, so my skills aren't at like professional kind of camera making level, which I think is actually perfect in terms of this kind of review, because I'm looking at it as a more like an amateur, like I am, kind of using this kind of upgrade of a camera and seeing how it kind of works, especially if you're somebody who's interested in doing like content creating and stuff like that. If this is a good kind of camera to go on, and so far that I've used it, it is a good camera. The few things I have noticed with it is obviously compared to the cameras I've used in the past, whether it was my phone or the past cameras I've used in the past, this camera is slightly heavier, so I can see it being a little bit more of a fatigue on the arm front in terms of if you're holding it for too long. And the other thing too, I noticed on the last solo podcast I did, if a clip goes too long, I don't know if it's the memory card that I had in the camera itself or the camera itself, but for some reason in the one clip it stopped at one point and kept going and made a new clip out of it, which I found interesting. It didn't like ruin it or anything, or didn't cut anything out. It was just interesting where it was just a hard stop on one clip and then just kept going, even though I didn't hit record or anything or stop recording. It just kind of stopped, which I found interesting. Those are the only things I've really quote unquote critique of or anything kind of a con on this camera so far. But we'll see if anything else kind of comes along as this review goes on. But that's about it in terms of looking at it from the indoor kind of perspective of this camera. I've showcased it a lot in terms of doing those solo podcasts and everything. The thing I'm really interested in is when I take it outside. Kind of another thing when I'm looking at as well, kind of a subcategory I would argue, is different lighting. So if it's in a darker kind of setting, how well it does versus kind of a well lit kind of setting, which this kind of office space for the most part is. And even right now I'm doing this kind of shot kind of early in the day, or this video early in the day, so there's still a good amount of sunlight even though the lights are off in my room right now, so it's not really showing too much in terms of being like in a darker kind of setting. But when I did do that tour, I did kind of showcase the last space I was in, and it was kind of darker, but it still showcased enough of the light that it didn't really do anything. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything that's really going to be too dark, so I'm just curious how that'll end up being in terms of this camera. But having said all that, now it is time to go head outside and see how this camera does in the outdoor kind of setting. It's actually a setting I haven't really used too much really with this camera, so I'm very curious to see how it does. I assume it's still going to be pretty good, just knowing how Nikon kind of is with cameras and everything. And I'm curious how it's going to go with just kind of going about kind of my day just outside, kind of testing out in these different areas. Before we step outside, I just want to see how this camera does transitioning from going indoor to outdoor. So let's just see how that is. It is a pretty bright day out, and ignore any construction noise you hear in the background. It is a bright one out here though, I will say that. It's bright, but it feels great out actually. It feels, like I just mentioned in the last clip, really great out. Doesn't even feel like middle of August as I'm recording this, or near the end of August, but yeah, nice, almost fall-like weather almost. But either way, this little clip here, I'm kind of testing out two different things. Like I mentioned when I first came out here, there's construction kind of going on not too far from here, so if you hear that, I hope my voice kind of drowns that out a little bit. I'm also kind of in shaded area right now, so I'm just going to see how, again, that kind of does focusing on me as I kind of step a little bit closer to kind of the sun and everything. Like I mentioned, it is bright though. There's barely any cloud in the sky. Like I mentioned, barely any clouds in the sky right now. But definitely a nice day. Zoom into a few things, just see how it kind of does there. If you aren't familiar with this pool and that GoPro review I did, I was in here for a little bit of it, just kind of showcasing how it looked underwater and everything. So far, this camera has done a tremendous job in terms of transitioning to outside, just showing everything. Again, I'm not too terribly surprised about it, and I'm sure I could go a lot deeper into some of the more advanced features and stuff like that on this camera, but these are the main areas I was most curious about in terms of looking over this camera. And again, I'm not the most tech-savvy person. I know I'm repeating myself a few times when I say that, but so far, this is probably the best camera I've ever kind of purchased. For me, it was probably around like a little over $500 for the camera itself. And you can do a little cheaper if you just do the, camera itself without the lens, but I added the lens onto it, which added a little bit more to the price, but still, for $500, I actually think that's a pretty decent price for something that you're getting out of this. Again, if you're a content creator, I highly suggest this if you want to upgrade your kind of camera game. But if you're not and you just don't want to or you're not really in that budget to really go for it, your phone's probably going to be a great kind of backup if you want to do that as well. Use that for your kind of content kind of creating if that's what you're doing, or you need a good camera. And obviously, I'm using this Z30 for doing content, kind of creating stuff like that, and this video and everything. But obviously, because it's Nikon and everything, it's great for just taking photos of everyday stuff too. So if I had to give this camera a rating at how they suggested, I'd probably give it an 8.5 out of 5. But yeah, that's all I really have for this one, I guess. I didn't go, again, as deep as you probably could have in terms of doing this, but this is kind of a good kind of overview. As again, I'm going to step a little bit more into the sun so I'm not so backlit. There we go. As I squint my way to the end of this video, and I'll leave information down below if you're interested in this Nikon Z30. Until next time, I'll see you. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.